I'm Tova, and welcome back to my kitchen, featured on DiabeticSurvivalKit.com. In celebration of fall, I have a great new dessert recipe for you today. It's an apple pumpkin softie, which is kind of like a cookie. The ingredients I'm about to tell you about are for 12 cookies. So here's what you need. 1/4 cup of white flour, 1/4 cup of wheat flour, 1/8 cup of rolled oats, 1/8 cup of toasted wheat germ. You can get this in the cereal aisle of your local grocery store. 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder, 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda, 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon, 1/8 teaspoon of salt, or just a pinch, 1/8 teaspoon of ground ginger, or just a pinch, and a pinch of nutmeg. As for sugar, you have several options. You can use 1/4 cup of tightly packed brown sugar, or you can use Splenda or Sweet and Low substitute, equivalent to 1/4 cup. In my case, I'm using Sweet and Low substitute of 1/4 cup of sugar, which is 2 teaspoons. You also need 1/2 egg, a tablespoon of vegetable oil, a small handful of your favorite nut of choice. The recipe calls for pecans, but here I'm using almonds. A small handful of dried cranberries or craisins. You also need slightly less than 1/2 cup of canned pumpkin and a grated 1/2 an apple. I picked this one myself. You also need 1 large and 1 medium mixing bowl, a cooling rack for when we're all done, a baking sheet lined with parchment paper, an oven preheated to 350 degrees, and you may find it helpful to have an electric mixer, but this one is definitely doable with just some elbow grease. So let's get started. So I did my mise en place to be super easy. The first step is to take everything from the white flour all the way through the nutmeg, put them in the big bowl, and mix them up. So we've got the flour, the other flour, the oats and the wheat germ, the baking powder and the baking soda, the cinnamon and the salt, the ginger, and a pinch of nutmeg. And then we're going to stir till combined. Then into the smaller bowl you take 1/2 the egg, so crack the egg into another bowl, beat it slightly, pour 1/2 the contents into here. The apple, the pumpkin, the oil, and the sugar. Stir to combine. Then, as I'm sure you've expected, you take the contents of the small bowl, or the wet ingredients, pour it into the big bowl with the flour mixture, and stir until just combined. You don't want to beat it, you just want to combine. When you've got your batter, you add the nuts, if you're using nuts. You can also feel free to leave them out. This recipe calls for pecans, but I like almonds, so that's how I'm rolling today. Then we take a tablespoon and drop batter in tablespoons onto the cookie sheet with the parchment paper on it until we've got 12 of them. And your final step before baking is take your small handful of cranberries, approximately 1/8 cup, and put a few on the top of each cookie. Now we are ready to bake. Meander over to the oven. Don't trip over the dog, it's very important. Place it at 350 and bake for 10 to 12 minutes or until hard to the touch and slightly browned on the top. This recipe was brought to you in proud partnership with FaveHealthyRecipes.com. When your cookies are done and you've removed them from the oven, place them on a cooling rack so that they can cool before you can safely eat them. I sourced this recipe from DiabeticLivingOnline.com, and here's what you need to know about the nutritional information. A serving size for this recipe is 1 softie, or 1 cookie, and each one contains 78 calories, 13 grams of carbohydrate minus 1 for fiber, so that's 12 grams of net absorbable carbohydrates, and that's if you use brown sugar. Because I used a sugar substitute, there's significantly fewer grams of carbohydrates per cookie. There are also 3 grams of total fat, only 1 of which is saturated, and you get 2 grams of protein per cookie as well. I very much hope that you've enjoyed watching me prepare these cookies for you. It's a nice welcome to the fall season, which I always love. And I hope to see you again very soon. From my kitchen to yours, here's to a happier and healthier you. Bye!